Hello, my dark hearts, the place where we pull back the velvet curtain on love's most shadowed corners. Here, we don't shy away from the darkness, we embrace it. We understand that sometimes the most passionate flames are ignited not by light, but by friction, by danger, and by the very things that are supposed to tear us apart. We explore the intoxicating, the forbidden, and the intense connections that thrive where they shouldn't. Today, we are descending into a story that embodies the very essence of dark romance. We're diving into a world of old money, older grudges, and absolute power. A world ruled by two families locked in a century-long war, written in blood and paid for in lives. The Morettis and the This is a tale of mortal enemies, of a man and a woman who were raised on hatred for one another, who have seen the worst of what each other's bloodline can do. And now, to forge a fragile, desperate peace, they are being forced into the most intimate of contracts, a marriage. Get ready for a story of intense love and even more intense hatred. We will explore the constant, suffocating tension, the vicious games of power played not on the streets but in the gilded cage of their own home, and that dangerously thin, blurred line between out-consuming loathing and a fatal, perilous attraction. Can a flower of passion truly grow from soil salted with the blood of your own kin? So, before we descend into the intoxicating darkness of the Moretti and Volkov feud, do me a small favor that helps this channel immensely. If you believe in the power of these complex stories, hit that like button. It tells the algorithm that this is the kind of darkness you crave. If you're new here and you're ready to explore more tales of forbidden love, make sure you subscribe and ring that notification bell so you never miss a chapter of our unfolding sagas. And for today's thought, drop a comment below and tell me, do you believe true, passionate love can be born from pure, unadulterated hate? I'll be reading your thoughts. Now, dim the lights, get comfortable, and let's begin our story. The story of Alessia Volkov and Dante Moretti, a story we call enemies by blood, bound by vow. The air in the penthouse suite was so cold it felt like a physical entity, a block of ice pressing in on Alessia Volkov from all sides. It had nothing to do with the thermostat and everything to do with the man sitting across from her. Dante Moretti. His name was a curse she'd learned before she'd learned to pray. From her seat, flanked by her father, Ivan Volkov, and her two stone-faced cousins, she watched him. He was the epitome of everything she despised. He wore a tailored Brioni suit, the color of midnight, the fabric clinging two broad shoulders that were built for violence. His dark hair was perfectly styled, a stark contrast to the untamed storm in his eyes, the color of aged whiskey that held a glint of cruel amusement as they swept over her. He lounged in his chair, a picture of arrogant ease, as if he owned this neutral territory and everyone in it. To his side sat his father, Antonio Moretti, the serpent, who had led their family for 3 decades, his face a mask of false cordiality. The silence in the room was a weapon in itself. For an hour, the two patriarchs had spoken in low, measured tones about truce, about ending the bloodshed that had painted the city's streets red for generations, a war that had cost Alessia her brother. The thought of Mikhail was a fresh stab of a poisoned blade twisting in her heart. She could still see him, his laughter echoing in the halls of their family estate, his hand ruffling her hair, promising to always protect her. The Morettis had taken him from her. A car bomb meant for her father had caught Mikhail instead. She had been 16. The fire, the screams, the scent of burning metal and something sickeningly swidget was all seared into her memory, and the man responsible for the order, the one who profited from her brother's death, was now sitting across from her, looking at her as if she were a particularly interesting piece of art he was considering acquiring. The terms have been laid out, Antonio Moretti said, his voice a smooth, deceptive purr that reminded Alessia of a predator calming its prey before the kill. The bloodshed has weakened us both. It has drawn unwanted attention. It is time for a new way, a permanent alliance. Her father, Ivan, a bear of a man with a will of iron, nodded slowly. His gaze was heavy, fixed on his rival. A permanent alliance requires a foundation of trust, something that does not exist between our houses. Then we shall create it, Antonio countered, a faint smile playing on his lips. We will create a bond that cannot be broken, a symbol of this new era. We will unite our families in the oldest way known to man. Alessia's blood ran cold. She felt a premonition, a dark, coiling dread in the pit of her stomach. She saw Dante's eyes flicker to her, a knowing, predatory gleam entering their depths. He knew what was coming. He was in on it. "We will unite the House of Moretti and the House of Volkov through marriage," Antonio announced, his voice booming with false magnanimity. The world seemed to tilt on its axis. Alessia's breath hitched. A roaring began in her ears, drowning out the faint hum of the city traffic 20 floors below. Marriage. The word was an obscenity. "My son," Dante Antonio said, gesturing to the silent, watching predator beside him, "and your daughter, Alessia." Alessia's gaze snapped to her father. His face was granite, unreadable, but he did not deny it. He did not roar in outrage. He simply met her desperate, pleading eyes with a look of grim finality. This was her sentence. A life imprisonment. A sacrifice on the altar of a peace she didn't believe in, offered to the monsters who had stolen her happiness. A bitter, hysterical laugh almost bubbled up her throat. She swallowed it down, turning it into a shard of ice in her soul. She would not give them the satisfaction of a breakdown. She was a Volkov. She was the daughter of the pack. She would not show weakness in front of the enemy. She slowly rose to her feet, the silk of her dress whispering in the suffocating silence. Every eye in the room was on her. She ignored them all, her focus narrowing, sharpening like the edge of a stiletto, until it was fixed on one person, Dante Moretti. He watched her, his head tilted slightly, that infuriating smirk now a full-fledged, confident smile. It was a smile that said, "I've already won. This is your solution." Her voice was low, laced with a venom she didn't try to hide. "To chain me to him." He took a slow step forward, then another. The space between them crackled with a palpable energy, a mixture of pure hatred and something darker, something ancient and unnamed. He stopped, barely an arm's length from her, close enough that she could smell the faint, clean scent of his Colin bergamot and cedarwood, a scent of sophistication for the butcher she knew him to be. "Chains can be worn in many ways, Princessa," he murmured, his voice a low vibration that seemed to bypass her ears and settle directly in her bones. The use of the Russian endearment was a deliberate mockery, a sharp jab at her heritage. "Some are burdens, others." His eyes dropped, sweeping over her body with an insolent appraisal before meeting her gaze again, "are the price of a crown." "There is no crown for me in the House of Moretti." Alessia shot back, her voice like ice, "only a guillotine." A genuine, dark laugh rumbled in his chest. It was a beautiful sound, and she hated him for it. Always so dramatic. "The Volkovs. You see death around every corner. I see opportunity. This arrangement ends a war that should have ended a decade ago. It saves the lives of your men and mine. It makes us untouchable. You are not being led to a guillotine. You are being handed an empire built on the bones of my family, the bones of my brother." The words were out before she could stop them, cold and sharp. His smile didn't falter, but a flicker of something new, something hard and dangerous entered his eyes. He had registered the hit. "The war has cost us all. I have buried cousins, uncles, friends. You are not unique in your grief," he said, his tone dismissing her pain as if it were a trifle. "The difference is, I am willing to do what is necessary to stop the bleeding. Your father understands this. It's a shame his daughter is more concerned with sentimental grudges than with survival. What you call survival, I call surrender. I have never surrendered in my life," he said, his voice dropping to a near whisper, intense and absolute. He closed the remaining distance between them, and her every instinct screamed at her to step back, to draw the pearl-handled blade she had strapped to her thigh. But she held her ground, refusing to give him the satisfaction. He was so close now she had to tilt her head back slightly to look him in the eye. He was a wall of muscle and menace. His hand came up, and for a terrifying second, she thought he would strike her. Instead, his fingers, surprisingly warm, brushed a strand of dark hair from her cheek. His touch was electric, a jolt of revulsion and horrifying awareness that shot through her. She flinched, a small, involuntary movement, and a triumphant smirk touched his lips. "You will be my wife," he stated, not as a proposal, but as a fact of nature, like gravity or the rising of the sun. "You will stand by my side, you will smile for the cameras, and you will give our enemies, our former enemies, no reason to doubt this union. In public, you will be the adoring queen to my king, and in private." The question was a dare. His eyes darkened, the whiskey turning to a smoldering amber. "In private, you will learn that I am not a man to be crossed. You will learn your place, and in time, you will give me an heir, cementing this truce in blood and name. A child that is both Moretti and Volkov, the perfect symbol of peace. Nausea rose in her throat, hot and acidic. A child, his child. The thought was a violation more profound than any physical threat. To carry the blood of her family's murderer inside her. It was a fate worse than any death she could imagine. "I would rather die," she breathed, the words filled with a lifetime of loathing. "That can be arranged," he said softly, his thumb brushing against the delicate skin of her jaw. "But I think you'll find I have other plans for you. You have fire. Alessia Volkov. I have no interest in ruling over a kingdom of ash. I want to see you burn." Before she could formulate a response, the door opened and their fathers walked back in, their faces set. The moment was broken. Dante stepped back, the warmth of his touch lingering on her skin like a brand. He was once again the composed, arrogant prince, his mask of civility perfectly in place. "It is done," Ivan Volkov said, his voice heavy. He would not look at his daughter. He couldn't. "The arrangements will be made. The wedding will be in 2 weeks. 2 weeks. 14 days until her life was officially over." The ride back to the Volkov estate was a blur of silent fury. Alessia stared out the armored window of the limousine, seeing nothing of the city's streets. She felt numb, hollowed out, a ghost in her own life. When they arrived, she swept past the guards who bowed their heads in respect, her heels clicking an angry rhythm on the marble floors. She didn't stop until she reached her father's study, a room of dark wood, leather, and the scent of cigars. She stormed in without knocking. He was standing by the fireplace, staring into the unlit hearth, a glass of vodka in his hand. "How could you?" she demanded, her voice shaking with a rage she no longer tried to contain. "How could you sell me to them? To him, after what they did to Mikhail?" Ivan Volkov finally turned to face her. The iron mask was gone. In its place was a weariness that seemed to bone deep, aging him years in the span of an afternoon. "Do you think I wanted this?" he asked, his voice rough. "Do you think I am happy? I visit your brother's grave every Sunday, Alessia. Do not ever speak to me as if I have forgotten." "Then why?" she cried, tears of frustration and betrayal finally welling in her eyes. "Why give them your daughter?" "Because I am tired of giving them my sons," he roared, slamming his glass down on the mantelpiece with such force that it shattered. Vodka and shards of glass sprayed across the stone. "I am tired of burying our people. The Morettis are stronger than they have been in 50 years. Their connections run deeper. Another year of this war, and we would not have a family left to rule. We would be history." This wasn't a sale. It was a surrender to save us from annihilation. His anger deflated as quickly as it had erupted, leaving him looking frail. "He is their future, and you are ours. This is how we survive. I am not a pawn, father." "No," he said, his voice softening. He walked over to her, his large, calloused hands resting on her shoulders. "You're not. You are a Volkov. You are my daughter. You are smarter than any of them. You are a warrior. I trained myself. Do not think of this as a cage. Think of it as the ultimate infiltration. You will be in the heart of their fortress. You will be his wife. You will have access to everything. Their secrets, their plans, their weaknesses. A knife in the dark is more effective than an army in the field. Do you understand?" She stared at him, seeing the desperate strategist behind the grieving father. He wasn't just sacrificing her. He was arming her. He was asking her to fight the war in a different way. The idea began to take root in the barren ground of her despair, a small, poisonous seed of purpose. He saw the shift in her eyes. "Do not let him break you, Alessia. Bend, if you must, but do not break. Be his wife, be his queen, and be the serpent in his bed. Find their weakness, and one day we will burn their house to the ground from the inside out." The tears dried on her face, replaced by a cold, chilling resolve. Her father was right. This was not a surrender. It was a redeployment. She would not be Dante Moretti's docile bride or the mother of his heir. She would be his ruin. She spent the next 2 weeks in a haze of forced preparations, dress fittings for a gown as white as her soul was black, tastings for food she would never eat, discussions of flower arrangements that felt like choosing the blooms for her own funeral. Through it all, she was a perfect, cold doll, compliant on the outside, but seething with a newfound purpose within. She saw Dante only once more before the wedding, at a staged dinner for the inner circles of both families. The tension was thick enough to choke on. He played his part perfectly, the charming, attentive, his hand resting on the small of her back, his touch a constant, proprietary torment. He would whisper things in her ear, meant for her alone. "The color red suits you," he murmured as she took a sip of wine. "I look forward to seeing more of it." A clear reference to the Volkov family color, but with an undercurrent of violence and passion that made her skin crawl. She would simply smile sweetly and reply, "And you, Dante, you look so handsome in black. It will be perfect for your morning." His eyes would flash, and he would grip her just a little tighter. A silent battle of wills fought in coded words and hidden glares. On the night before her wedding, Alessia stood on the balcony of her bedroom, overlooking the vast, dark grounds of the Volkov estate. This was the last night she would be here. The last night she would be only Alessia. Tomorrow, she would become Alessia Moretti. The name tasted like ash in her mouth. She thought of Mikhail, of his easy laugh and fierce loyalty. She thought of her father's desperate command to be a serpent, and she thought of Dante's arrogant, handsome face, his promise of an empire, and his threat to see her burn. He wanted fire. He would get it. She wouldn't just be the serpent in his bed. She would be the poison in his wine, the crack in his foundation, the ghost in his house. He thought he was getting a queen to solidify his reign. He had no idea he was welcoming his own personal Trojan horse through the gates. The marriage wouldn't be a truce. It would be the beginning of a new, more intimate, and far deadlier war. And it was a war she intended to win. The day of the wedding dawned grey and unforgiving. The sky a bruised sheet of pewter that promised a cold rain. It suited Alessia's mood perfectly. She stood before the floor-to-ceiling mirror in her chambers, a marble statue in a sea of white silk and lace. The dress was a masterpiece of couture, impossibly expensive and exquisitely detailed, and she hated every thread of it. It felt like a burial shroud. Her maids, women from her own family, moved around her with grim, silent efficiency. There was no joyful chatter, no happy tears. This was not a celebration. It was a deployment. They fastened the final pearl buttons, their touch gentle but impersonal. They were dressing a lamb for slaughter, but they didn't know their lamb had sharpened her teeth. Her reflection stared back at her, a stranger in a white cage. The artist brought in by the Morettis had swept her dark hair into an elegant, severe chignon, leaving a few tendrils to frame a face that was pale and flawless. Her makeup was subtle, designed to enhance a bridal glow she did not feel. The only color on her was the deep, defiant crimson of her lips, a slash of war paint. Her father entered the room, dismissing the maids with a flick of his wrist. They bowed and departed, closing the heavy doors behind them, leaving a thick, expectant silence. Ivan Volkov was dressed in a perfectly tailored dark suit, looking every bit the powerful pack. He circled her once, his eyes analytical, missing nothing. "You look like a queen," he said, his voice a low rumble. It was not a compliment. It was an assessment of her readiness. "A queen on her way to a foreign court," she replied, her voice steady. "Every court has its vipers. You must learn to charm them or crush them before they strike." He stopped in front of her. For a moment, she saw a flicker of the father she knew from childhood, a shadow of pain in his eyes. It was gone as quickly as it appeared. "This is not just about survival anymore, Alicia. This is about victory. He will try to own you. He will try to break your will and make you into one of his possessions. Let him think he is succeeding. An underestimated opponent is a foolish one. I will not forget who I am," she vowed, meeting his gaze in the mirror, "or what they took from us." "Good," he said, his tone clipped. "The car is waiting. It is time." The journey to the cathedral was short and silent. It was a grand, Gothic structure of grey stone and stained glass, a neutral ground chosen for its imposing presence and its history of hosting the city's elite for weddings and funerals alike. Today, it felt like both. As her father walked her down the long, velvet trunard aisle, she felt hundreds of eyes on her. To her left, the Moretti side, a sea of smug, triumphant faces and veiled curiosity. To her right, the Volkovs, their expressions grim, respectful, a silent promise of loyalty to her, their sacrificial princess. She kept her eyes forward, focused on the man waiting at the altar, Dante. He was magnificent and terrible. His tuxedo was tailored to perfection, emphasizing the lethal power in his frame. He stood with an unnerving stillness, his hands clasped behind his back, watching her approach as a hawk watches its prey. There was no softness in his eyes, only a raw, possessive heat that burned away the sacred chill of the church. When her father placed a hand in Dante's, the contact was a shock. His grip was firm, his skin warm. He was real. This was real. As her father stepped back, Dante's thumb brushed over her knuckles in a gesture that might have looked tender to the onlookers, but felt to her like the closing of a lock. He lifted her veil. For a second, a hushed intake of breath rippled through the pews. He didn't smile. His whiskey-colored eyes locked onto hers, and in their depths, she saw the entire brutal, unspoken truth of their union. It was a vow of war, not love. The priest began to speak, his voice echoing in the vaulted space, but the holy words were nothing but meaningless noise. Alessia and Dante were locked in their own silent, vicious dialogue. ... To have and to hold, from this day forward, to trap and to control, was the promise in his eyes. Double quotes. ... For better, for worse, for richer, for poorer. ... Your worst will be my masterpiece, her cold stare replied. ... In sickness and in health. ... I will be the poison that sickens your soul, she thought, her lips curving into the faintest of smiles. ... To love and to cherish, till death do us part. The final words hung in the air between them, a shared, mutual threat, and I will be the one to arrange that death. They both thought, the vow a cold stone in the pits of their stomachs. I do, Dante said, his voice a clear, confident baritone that resonated with power. I do, Alessia replied, her own voice just as clear, as sharp and unbreakable as a diamond. You may kiss the bride. He didn't hesitate. His hand slid from her back to the nape of her neck, his fingers tangling in the base of her carefully constructed hairstyle. He pulled her in, and his mouth claimed hers. It was not a gentle kiss. It was a brand. It was punishing and possessive, a stark declaration of ownership meant for her alone, disguised as passion for the world. It was the seal on their contract, and it stole the breath from her lungs, leaving her dizzy with hatred and a terrifying, unwelcome jolt of pure adrenaline. The reception was held in a lavishly decorated grand ballroom, dripping with crystals and overflowing with white roses that smelled The tension between the two families was a living thing, a beast prowling beneath the clinking of champagne glasses and the forced, polite laughter. Their first dance was a study in exquisite torture. Dante led her to the center of the floor, his hand burning on the small of her back. He pulled her flush against him, leaving no room for escape, and they began to move to a slow, melancholic waltz. To the world, they were a breathtaking couple, the Dark Prince and his Ice Queen. You are even more beautiful when you are seething, he murmured into her ear, his breath warm against her skin. It puts a fire in your eyes. Be careful what you wish for, husband, she whispered back, her fingers pressing ever so slightly into his shoulder. Fire consumes everything, even the man who starts it. He chuckled, a low, dangerous sound. I am not afraid of being burned. You feel so delicate in my arms, as if I could snap you in two. Fragile things can be the sharpest. Dante, do not forget that. He pulled her closer, his lips brushing the shell of her ear. The performance is nearly over. Moyaji, my wife, and then I get to take you home. Later, she was forced to endure the congratulations of her new family. Antonio Moretti took her hand, his palm dry and cool. Welcome, my dear Alessia, he said, his smile never reaching his cold, calculating eyes. May you bring my son great happiness. And, he left unsaid, an heir, a young woman with Dante's dark hair and a more open, yet wary, face approached them. Alessia, I am Sofia, Dante's sister. It's a pleasure, Alessia said, her voice neutral. You are very brave, Sofia said in a low, conspiratorial tone, her eyes flicking toward her brother. Not an easy man. It wasn't clear if it was a warning or an offer of alliance. Alessia filed it away. Another piece on the board. Finally, the endless night began to draw to a close. The orchestra played its final song. The last of the champagne was poured. It was time. Dante took her arm, his grip possessive. Our chariot awaits, he said, leading her through the throng of guests. They were showered with petals and good wishes that felt like curses. A sleek, black Rolls-Royce was waiting for them, the door held open by a silent driver. The car was an island of dark intimacy in the cool night air. Dante guided her inside, the scent of leather and his cologne filling the small space. He slid in beside her, and the door clicked shut with an ominous finality. They were alone. The public performance was over. The car pulled away from the curb, gliding silently into the city's stream of lights. The light and shadows played across their faces, illuminating his hard profile and her own cold, composed features. Neither of them spoke. The silence was absolute, a heavy blanket thick with unspoken threats and the terrifying anticipation of what was to come. They were driving toward their new life, their new home, her prison, his battlefield. The private war was about to begin. The silence in the car was a living thing, a coiled serpent of anticipation and contempt. Alessia stared out at the blur of city lights, each one a distant star in a world that no longer felt like hers. She was acutely aware of Dante beside her, of the heat radiating from his body, of the sheer space he occupied. He did not look at her, his profile carved from stone as he stared ahead, but she could feel his attention on her, a weight as real as a physical touch. After what felt like an eternity, the car slowed, turning off the main road and onto a private lane. Massive, wrought iron gates, adorned with the snarling wolf of the Moretti crest, swung open silently to admit them. The driveway was long and winding, flanked by ancient oak trees that formed a dark, imposing canopy overhead. It was designed to impress, to intimidate. Finally, the house came into view. It wasn't a house. It was a fortress, a sprawling, Italianate mansion of pale stone. It rose from the manicured lawns like a monument to old-world power and new-world ruthlessness. It was architecturally perfect, aesthetically beautiful, and as cold and soulless as a mausoleum. Unlike the Volkov estate, which was always filled with the chaotic energy of family and life, this place felt still, preserved under glass. The car crunched to a halt on the gravel before the grand entrance. The driver opened Dante's door, but Dante didn't move. He turned his head, his whiskey-colored eyes finally meeting hers in the dim light of the car's interior. "A word of advice, Mowgli Mia," he said, his voice a low, dangerous purr. "In this house, the walls have ears, the staff have eyes, and I am king. Your performance does not end at the front door. It ends when I say it does. Do you understand?" "You mistake me for one of your subjects," she replied, her voice clipped and cool. I bow to no king." A flicker of amusement, or perhaps annoyance, crossed his face. "You are a Moretti now. The sooner you accept that, the easier your life will be." He exited the car without another word, leaving her to follow. She took a breath, steeling herself, and stepped out into the cool night air. Her new home, her new prison. Dante was waiting for her at the top of the wide stone steps. As she reached him, the massive oak doors swung open, seemingly of their own accord. A line of staff stood in a grand two-story foyer, their uniforms immaculate, their faces impassive. They were led by an older woman with iron-grey hair pulled into a severe bun and a gaze that could chip stone. "Mrs. Russo." Dante addressed the woman. "Mrs. my wife. She is to be afforded every courtesy. Her things have been taken to our suite." "Yes, Mr. Moretti," the housekeeper replied, her eyes flicking to Alessia for a brief, dismissive moment before returning to her master. There was no warmth, only rigid, unquestioning loyalty. Alessia understood instantly. These were his people. She was the enemy at the gates. "Welcome, Mrs. Moretti," Mrs. Russo said, her voice devoid of any emotion. Alessia simply nodded, refusing to be intimidated. She swept her gaze over the foyer, taking in the gleaming marble floors, the sweeping staircase, the priceless art on the walls. It was a display of immense wealth, but it felt hollow, a gilded cage. "Come," Dante said, his hand finding the small of her back again, a proprietary gesture for the benefit of his staff. He guided her up the sweeping staircase, their footsteps echoing in the cavernous silence. They passed portraits of grim-faced Moretti ancestors, their dark eyes seeming to follow her, judging her. He led her down a long, wide corridor to a set of double doors at the very end. He pushed them open and ushered her inside. The master's suite. It was vast, larger than the entire ground floor of some homes. It was decorated in shades of charcoal, black, and deep mahogany. A massive four-poster bed with a dark wood frame dominated the room, its covers turned down, an unspoken invitation and a threat. On one side of the room was a seating area with leather armchairs and a fireplace of black marble. On the other, floor-to-ceiling windows offered a panoramic view of the glittering city skyline in the distance. It was the view from a king's tower. Dante closed the doors behind them, the click of the latch sounding like a cell door locking. The performance was over. He walked past her, shrugging out of his tuxedo jacket and tossing it carelessly onto a chair. He loosened his tie, his movements fluid and confident. He was completely at ease in this space. He was the predator in his den. "Drink?" he asked, moving toward a crystal decanter of amber liquid on a sidebar. He paid her no mind, pouring a measure of whiskey into 2 heavy glasses. He turned, holding one out to her. She ignored it. With a slight shrug, he placed her glass on the mantelpiece and took a sip from his own, watching her over the rim. "Let us be clear about the terms of our life together," he began, his tone all business. "This is my home. You are my wife. You will respect my rules. You will manage this household alongside Mrs. Russo. You will host the necessary dinners, and you will attend their required functions on my arm. You will be perfect, silent, and beautiful. In return, you will want for nothing. Clothes, jewels, cars, they are all yours. A small price to pay for your compliance." Alessia finally moved, walking slowly toward the center of the room. Her wedding dress whispered against the thick rug. "You paid a high price for a dal dante. I hope you are not disappointed when you find she does not play by your rules." "Oh, you'll play by them," he said with absolute certainty. He set his glass down with a heavy thud. "Or you will learn the consequences." He began to walk toward her, his steps slow and deliberate. "There is one more term, the most important one. The entire point of this union." "The heir," she said, the word tasting like poison. "The heir," he confirmed, stopping directly in front of her. He was so close she could see the gold flecks in his whiskey eyes. "This piece is fragile. A child, a new bloodline combining Moretti and Volkov, will make it permanent. It will be the ultimate symbol of our strength. And you expect me to be a broodmare for my family's enemy?" She spat, her control finally cracking. "I expect you to be my wife," he countered, his voice dropping low and dangerously soft. In all the ways that matter, his hand shot out, grabbing her arm. His grip was like iron. "This is not a negotiation. This is the reality of your situation. Tonight, you become a Moretti in truth." He pulled her toward the bed, pure, primal fear ward, with her icy rage. This was it, the moment she had dreaded, but her father's words echoed in her mind. "Bend, but do not break. Be the serpent." He pushed her, and she stumbled backward, her legs hitting the edge of the mattress. She fell onto the soft bedding, the white silk of her dress pooling around her. He stood over her, a dark, menacing silhouette against the city lights. He began to unbutton his cuffs. "I will not be your whore," she breathed, scrambling backward on the bed. "You are my wife," he repeated, his eyes burning with a cold fire. "There is a difference. A whore is paid and dismissed. You, I get to keep." He lunged for her, but he had underestimated her. In a flash, her hand shot to her thigh, her fingers finding the familiar, cool handle of the stiletto she had refused to part with. She pulled it free from its sheath. Just as his weight came down on top of her, he was heavy, solid muscle, pinning her to the bed. His face was inches from hers, his scent whiskey and cedarwood and pure male aggression overwhelming her. He grabbed her wrists, pinning them above her head with one hand, but his other hand was met with the tip of her blade, pressed firmly against the hard muscle of his side. He froze. His eyes dropped to the point where the stiletto pricked his skin, not enough to draw blood, but enough to make its point. Surprise, then a dark, furious anger flashed across his face. He looked back at her, at the defiant, murderous rage in her eyes. A slow, chilling smile spread across his lips. It did not reach his eyes. He released her wrists and pushed himself up, off of her. He stood by the bed, looking down at her, the predator reassessing its prey, which had suddenly, unexpectedly, bitten back. Alessia sat up, the knife held expertly in her hand, its tip still pointed at him. Her heart was hammering against her ribs, but her hand was steady. "So," Dante said, his voice a soft, deadly caress. "The kitten has claws." He let out a low, dark chuckle that held no humor, only a newfound, dangerous interest. "This is going to be far more entertaining than I imagined." He turned his back on her and walked toward the adjoining door. "The room is yours tonight, Mowgli Mia. Do not get comfortable. The war is far from over. It has only just begun." He closed the door behind him, leaving her alone in the vast, silent room, the stiletto cold in her hand. The the city lights bearing silent witness to the first battle of her new life. Sleep did not come easy. Alessia lay awake for hours in the center of the vast, cold bed, the stiletto resting on the nightstand beside her, a silver promise of defiance. Every creak of the old house, every sigh of the wind outside the windows, was a potential threat. When exhaustion finally claimed her, it was a thin, dreamless sleep that did little to restore her. She awoke with a start to the first grey light of dawn filtering into the room. For a disoriented moment, she didn't know where she was. Then the cold, opulent reality crashed down on her. She was in Dante Moretti's room, in his house. She was his wife, alone. The door he had disappeared through last night remained firmly closed. Pushing back the heavy silk sheets, she rose and padded silently across the plush carpet. Her bridal gown lay in a heap on the floor where she'd stepped out of it, a crumpled white ghost. She kicked it aside with a bare foot. The first thing she needed to do was shed the last remnants of yesterday. She explored the suite. It was comprised of the main bedroom, a large sitting area, and two separate doors she had yet to open. The one Dante had used led, she presumed, to a study or his own dressing room. She tried the other. It opened into a walk-in closet that was more like a luxury boutique. Racks of designer dresses, shelves of shoes, and drawers of delicate lingerie were laid out with meticulous care. On a central island, velvet trays displayed a breathtaking collection of jewelry, diamonds, sapphires, emeralds a king's ransom. It was all for her. A cage gilded with the finest materials money could buy. It was meant to be a statement of his wealth and her new station. But to Alessia, it was just a prettier set of chains, a quiet declaration that he had purchased her, body and soul. She ignored the glittering gowns and expensive books. Tucked away in a corner, she found the suitcase her maids had packed for her. It contained her own clothes, her real armor. She selected a pair of simple black trousers and a fitted cashmere sweater in a deep charcoal gray. It was understated, severe, and utterly her own. She braided her long, dark hair into a single, tight plait that hung down her back. Looking in the mirror, she saw not a bride, not a victim, but a soldier ready for inspection. Taking a deep breath, she walked out of the suite and into the lion's den. The upstairs corridor was silent. She descended the sweeping staircase, her soft-soled shoes making no sound on the marble. The house was awake but quiet, the staff moving like ghosts on the periphery. As she reached the foyer, Mrs. Russo appeared as if from nowhere. "Good morning, Mrs. Moretti," the housekeeper said, her tone as starched as her uniform. "Mr. Moretti is in the breakfast room. He is expecting you." Alessia followed the woman through a series of grand, impersonal rooms to a smaller, sun-drenched space at the back of the house, overlooking a vast, manicured garden. Dante was there, sitting at a small table, a cup of coffee in one hand and a newspaper in the other. He was dressed in a crisp white shirt and dark trousers, looking completely relaxed and He glanced up as she entered, and his eyes swept over her, taking in her severe attire. A faint, mocking smile touched his lips. "Good morning, wife," he said, folding his newspaper. "I trust you slept well." "Like the dead," she replied, taking the seat opposite him. A servant immediately appeared to pour her coffee. Dante watched her, his expression unreadable. "Such a morbid turn of phrase for the morning after your wedding. My apologies. I'll be sure to sound more cheerful as I grow accustomed to my new prison," she said, her voice dripping with sarcasm. He ignored her tone. "Today, you will familiarize yourself with the estate. My sister, Sophia, has agreed to show you around. After that, you will consult with Mrs. Russo. We are hosting a small dinner party tomorrow evening for my most trusted captains and their wives. It's important they see us together and happy. You will ensure everything is perfect." It was a test, a command disguised as a simple request. He was throwing her into the deep end, forcing her to immediately assume a role she despised, to entertain the very men who likely celebrated her brother's death. "Of course," she said, her voice a silken mask of compliance. "I wouldn't want to disappoint your trusted captains." "I knew you were intelligent," he said, taking a sip of his coffee. His eyes held hers over the rim of the cup. "Play your part well, Alessia, and you will find me a generous husband. Defy me, and you will find my patience has its limits." He stood, placing his napkin on the table. "I have business to attend to. Sophia will be down shortly." He leaned down, his lips brushing her cheek in a parody of affection. "Try not to burn the house down on your first day," he whispered, his voice for her ears alone, before turning and leaving the room. True to his word, Sophia appeared a few minutes later. She was a softer version of her brother, her features less harsh, her eyes holding a warmth that Dante's lacked. She was dressed casually and offered Alessia a hesitant smile. "Good morning," Sophia said. "I hope you're settling in." "The house is impressive," Alessia replied carefully. "It can be a bit much," Sophia admitted. "Dante likes his monuments. Shall we?" The tour was an exercise in intelligence gathering for Alessia. As Sophia pointed out the ballroom, the library, the various sitting rooms, Alessia was mapping the layout, noting the position of security cameras, the thickness of doors, the routines of the guards she saw patrolling the grounds through the windows. "And this," Sophia said, pausing before a set of ornate, carved doors, "is Dante's study. His real throne room. No one goes in there, ever. Not even his wife?" Alessia asked, a hint of challenge in her voice. Sophia gave a small, nervous laugh. "Especially not his wife. He values his privacy. For the best, really. You don't want to know what happens in there." It was a flippant remark, but it confirmed the study was his sanctums, a place of secrets, a place she now had to get into. By the afternoon, Alessia was left to her own devices. She found Mrs. Russo in the cavernous kitchen, directing the staff with military precision. "Mrs. Russo," Alessia began, her tone polite but firm, "about the dinner party tomorrow." The housekeeper turned, her expression impassive. "Yes, Mrs. Moretti. I have already selected a menu, a classic Italian 5-course meal." "That sounds lovely," Alessia said. "But I would like to make one change. For the main course, instead of the veal, we will serve both." Mrs. Russo's thin eyebrows rose. "That is not an Italian dish." "No," Alessia said, a small smile on her lips. "It's Russian, a favorite from my home. I think it's important to blend our family traditions, don't you?" It was a direct challenge to the woman's authority, a small but significant act of cultural rebellion. Mrs. Russo's lips thinned. She knew she was being tested, and she knew who had the final say. Dante had commanded that his wife be given every courtesy. To refuse would be to disobey him. "As you wish, Mrs. Moretti," she said, her voice tight. "I will inform the chef." It was a tiny victory, but it felt monumental. She had planted her flag, however small, in enemy soil. That evening, she was back in the master suite, preparing for her own private battle. Dante was out, and she didn't know when he would return. She stood before the mirror, not in the simple clothes of the morning, but in a silk dressing gown, the color of blood. She was choosing her armor for the night. She had no idea what to expect, but she knew she had to be ready. The door to the suite opened. It was him. He stopped, his eyes taking her in. He had shed his jacket and tie, his sleeves rolled up to his forearms, revealing strong, tanned skin and a network of faint, silvery scars. He looked tired, but his gaze was as sharp and intense as ever. "Red," he said, his voice a low rumble. "A bold choice." "It's the color of my house," she replied, turning to face him fully, in case he had forgotten. "I haven't forgotten anything," he said, walking toward her. "I spent the day securing our new empire, while you spent it playing house and choosing dinner menus. I hope you performed your duties." "Your housekeeper seems to think so," she countered. He stopped in front of her, so close she could feel the tension humming between them. "Tomorrow night, you will smile. You will play the part of the adoring wife. You will make every man in that room believe this marriage is real, and you will make every one of their wives envy you." He reached out, his finger tracing the silk collar of her robe, and after they leave, he whispered, his eyes darkening with a dangerous promise, "You and I will continue our own negotiations." He leaned in, his lips brushing against her ear. "The war has just begun." The night of the dinner party, the Moretti mansion transformed. It was no longer a silent, cold mausoleum, but a glittering stage, bathed in the warm glow of chandeliers and filled with the low hum of powerful voices. The air was thick with the scent of expensive perfume, rich food, and simmering tension. Alessia stood beside Dante in the grand foyer, a perfect statue in a gown of emerald silk that clung to her like a second skin. It was a color of wealth and envy, chosen with deliberate intent. Her hair was swept up, exposing the elegant line of her neck, and the Moretti diamonds encircling her throat felt as heavy and cold as a collar. Dante's hand rested permanently on the small of her back, a possessive, branding heat. He was magnificent in a dark, tailored suit, the undisputed king in his court, and she was the beautiful, exotic prize he'd won in a war. They greeted each guest with flawless smiles, a united front of untouchable power. The guests were Dante's inner circle, hard-faced men who were his most trusted captains, their eyes sharp and assessing as they took in their boss's new wife. Their own wives were draped in jewels, their faces stretched into tight, polite smiles, their gazes flickering with a mixture of curiosity and jealousy. Alessia could feel their scrutiny, 1,000 tiny pinpricks on her skin. She was the new variable in their rigid hierarchy, and they were all trying to determine if she was a threat or a trinket. At dinner, she was seated at the opposite end of the long, polished table from Dante, the traditional seat for the lady of the house. From her throne, she played the part of the gracious hostess to perfection. She guided the conversation among the wives, discussing trivialities like fashion and travel, all while her ears were tuned to the men's conversation. A low rumble of coded words about shipments, territories, and troublesome rivals. Marco, a burly captain with a cruel mouth, turned to her halfway through the meal. "Mrs. Moretti," he said, his voice loud enough to draw attention. "It must be a significant change, coming to a civilized home like this. I hear the Volkov estates are more rustic." The veiled insult hung in the air. The table quieted slightly. Dante's eyes, dark and watchful, were fixed on her from across the vast expanse of the table. This was a test. Alessia gave Marco a serene smile. "You've been misinformed, Marco. Our homes are very old. We believe history gives a place its soul." She took a delicate sip of wine, "and we find the harsh winters to be a valuable asset. They tend to kill off vermin and snakes, ensuring only the strong survive. There's a certain honesty to it." A flicker of respect, or was it surprise, flashed in the eyes of some of the other men. Marco's face tightened. Dante's expression remained unreadable, but she knew he had heard. She had not only defended her family, but she had also called his captain a snake, all with a placid smile. The main course arrived. As servants placed plates of her beef stroganoff before the guests, a subtle wave of confusion rippled through the Italian-American assembly. Alessia watched Dante. He glanced down at the plate, then his eyes shot up, meeting hers across the table. There it was, a silent, charged acknowledgement. He understood exactly what she had done in the quiet battle she had fought and won in his kitchen. A corner of his mouth twitched, an infinitesimal movement that could have been annoyance, or something dangerously close to admiration. He gave her a slow, deliberate nod. A king acknowledging a clever move from his queen on the chessboard. The message was clear. Point to you, for now. Later, as the guests mingled with coffee and brandy, Alessia saw her opportunity. Sofia was standing alone on one of the terraces, gazing out at the dark gardens. Alessia glided over to her, closing the glass door behind them, muffling the noise of the party. "It's a successful evening," Alessia said, by way of opening. Sofia started slightly, then smiled. "You're a natural at this. It's like you were born to it." "I was born to a different world," Alessia said, allowing a hint of melancholy to enter her voice. She leaned against the stone balustrade. "It's all a bit overwhelming." She was casting a line, baiting a hook with false vulnerability. Sofia's expression soft with genuine sympathy. "I can only imagine. My brother, he doesn't make anything easy. He never has. He seems to thrive on control." Alessia probed gently. "He had to," Sofia said, her voice dropping. "After our mother died, everything changed. He was only 19, but he stepped up to protect me, to help my father. He built walls so high around himself that I don't think even he knows how to lower them anymore. He sees every interaction as a battle, every person as a piece to be moved on a board." The mention of his mother was the crack Alessia had been searching for, a piece of his past that explained the man. A fierce protector, shaped by loss. It didn't excuse his cruelty, but it gave it context. It was a weakness, sentiment. Before she could press further, the terrace door opened. Dante stood there, his presence instantly sucking all the warmth from the air. "Sofia, Marco's wife, was asking for you," he said. It was a command, not a suggestion. Sofia's face paled slightly. She gave Alessia a quick, apologetic look before scurrying back inside. Dante stepped onto the terrace, closing the door and encasing them in cold silence. "I hope you had a pleasant chat. Your sister is lovely," Alessia replied, turning to face him. "She is," he agreed, his voice dangerously smooth as he stepped closer. and she is naive. She is not a pawn in your game, Alessia. Do not use her to get to me. Do not try to poison her against this family. I am fiercely protective of what is mine, and she, like you, is now mine. His hand shot out and gripped her upper arm, his fingers biting into her flesh. Stay away from her. Is that understood? Your concern is touching, she said, wincing inwardly, but refusing to show it. But perhaps you should be more worried about who might poison me against you. He stared at her for a long moment, his thumb rubbing small, hypnotic circles on her arm, the gesture a strange mix of threat and caress. No one needs to poison you, Kara. Your hate for me is the purest thing about you. He released her abruptly and opened the door. The party is over. It is time to say goodbye to our guests. An hour later, the last car had pulled away. The house was silent again, the staff moving quietly to clear away the remnants of the feast. Donta dismissed them, leaving the two of them alone in the grand ballroom, the scent of faded perfume and snuffed-out candles hanging in the air. The truce of the evening was officially over. You played your part well tonight, he said, his voice low as he walked toward her. He methodically unfastened his cufflinks, his eyes never leaving her face. You were the perfect hostess, beautiful, charming, and just the right amount of lethal. I aim to please, she said, her body tensing as he closed the distance between them. No, you don't, he countered, a dark smile playing on his lips. He stopped directly in front of her. You aim to win, just like me. He reached out, his hand gently tucking a stray strand of hair behind her ear. His touch was electric, and she fought the urge to flinch. I was impressed tonight. At the table, you put Marco in his place without shedding a drop of blood. And the dinner? A clever move. His other hand came up to cup her jaw, his thumb stroking her cheek. But now our guests are gone. The performance is over, and I believe we have some unfinished negotiations. He backed her up against one of the large, ornate tables, trapping her between it and the hard wall of his body. His scent, his heat, his sheer presence was overwhelming. You set the rules for our wedding night, he whispered, his lips hovering just above hers, his eyes burning with an intensity that terrified and captivated her in equal measure. You surprised me. You won the round. His head dipped lower, his breath a warm caress against her mouth. Tonight, he murmured, the promise a silken threat. We play by mine. His mouth crashed down on hers. It was not like the kiss at the altar, the public declaration of ownership. This was a private war, a brutal, plundering assault. It was a kiss born of fury and a desire to dominate, to shatter the icy composure she wore like armor. His lips were hard, demanding, and he gave no quarter. One of his hands tangled in her hair, yanking her head back at a sharp angle, while the other held her pinned against the table, his body an unyielding wall of muscle. Alessia fought back with the instinct of a cornered animal. She pushed against his chest, her hands balled into fists, but it was like trying to move a mountain. He absorbed her struggles without effort, his mouth silencing her muffled protests. Her mind was a maelstrom of pure, unadulterated hate. This was her enemy, the man whose family had destroyed hers, and he was violating her, forcing a response. And that was the most terrifying part. A treacherous, unwilling heat began to coil low in her belly. Her body, despite the revulsion in her mind, was reacting to the raw, masculine force of him, to the sheer intensity of his focused will. A wave of shame and self-loathing washed over her, more potent than her hatred for him. To be betrayed by her own senses was the ultimate defeat. This realization shocked her into a new kind of clarity. Force wouldn't work. A knife wouldn't work a second time. She needed a different weapon, a sharper one. She stopped struggling. Her sudden stillness made him pause. He lifted his head slightly, his breathing ragged, his eyes dark and stormy as he searched her face for the surrender he expected. But he found no fear, no submission, only a new, chilling coldness. "Is this how you do everything?" she asked, her voice a low, cutting whisper in the silent room. "Solve your problems with brute force? Is this what you learned after your mother died? That bullying a woman is the same as being strong?" It was a direct hit. He flinched, as if she'd physically struck him. The hand in her hair loosened, and he recoiled from her, his face a mask of disbelief and pure fury. The predatory heat in his eyes was replaced by a dangerous, glacial rage. He looked at her as if he'd never truly seen her before. "What did you say?" he snarled, his voice lethally soft. "I've seen men like you." She pressed on, her heart hammering but her voice steady. She pushed herself off the table, creating space between them. You build walls of anger and control because you're terrified of the grief inside. You rule an empire, but you can't even rule your own pain. You're not a king, Dante. You're just a broken boy playing with his father's guns. For a terrifying second, she thought he would kill her. His entire body went rigid. His hands clenched into fists at his sides, and a muscle jumped in his jaw. He was vibrating with a rage so profound it seemed to suck the very air from the room. He had expected tears, or defiance, or even a fight. He had never expected to be psychoanalyzed. He had never expected her to see through his armor. When he finally spoke, his voice was devoid of all emotion. It was the flat, dead voice of absolute finality. "You have just crossed a line from which there is no return," he said. He walked over to the fireplace and stared into the dying embers, his back to her. "This game you are playing, it ends now." He turned back to face her, his face composed, his control absolute once more, but his eyes were different. The dangerous glint of attraction was gone, replaced by the dispassionate gaze of a true enemy. "You want your space, Alessia? You will have it," he declared. "Our truce is no longer a negotiation. It is a set of my decrees. You will not speak to my sister again. You will not engage in private conversations with anyone in this house. You will perform your duties as my wife in public, and in private, you and I will not exist to one another. I will not touch you again. The matter of an heir is postponed indefinitely, as I have no desire to father a child with a viper." The words were meant to wound, but they were a victory, a reprieve. "But know this," he continued, walking toward the door. "My surveillance on you will be absolute. Every move you make, every word you speak, will be reported to me. You are no longer a defiant wife. You are a prisoner in my home, and prisoners who break the rules are punished severely. Try me again, and you will discover the true meaning of the word Moretti." He left, without another word, the heavy ballroom door closing with a definitive click behind him. Alessia stood trembling in the silent room, the adrenaline slowly draining from her body, leaving her weak and hollow. She had won. She had pushed him away, but the victory felt perilous. She had stripped away his mask and shown him hers. Now they were no longer a warring husband and wife. They were two enemy combatants sharing a roof, and he had just placed her in solitary confinement. The days that followed were cold and empty. The truce held. Dante was a ghost, a presence she felt but rarely saw. They slept in separate wings of the vast suite. They ate meals in stony silence. If they ate together at all, when they were forced to attend a function, they were the perfect couple, their smiles flawless, their touches brief and electric with unspoken animosity. He was true to his word. She was watched constantly. A guard would be stationed unobtrusively in the corridor outside her rooms. The staff spoke to her only when necessary, their replies brief and formal. She was an island in the middle of his vast, hostile ocean. Sophia avoided her, her eyes full of fear and apology whenever they crossed paths. Alessia used the isolation. She read. She walked the gardens under the watchful eye of a guard, and she observed. She learned the rhythms of the house, the changing of the guard shifts, the precise timing of the staff's duties. Her father's words echoed in her mind. "Be the serpent. A serpent is patient. A serpent waits for the perfect moment to strike." Her focus narrowed to a single objective, Dante's study, the throne room, the heart of his power. It was the one place she was forbidden to go, and therefore the one place she had to be. 1 week after the dinner party, she found her opportunity. There was a major meeting of all the family heads from across the country, a summit Dante was hosting. It was not at the house, but at a heavily secured downtown hotel. The estate's security would be on high alert, but the majority of the household's focus, and Dante's most elite guards, would be with him. The house itself would be in a state of controlled chaos, preparing for his return. And there was a window. Between 2 a.m. and 2:15 a.m., the guard on her corridor, a younger man named Leo, always did a perimeter check of the second floor, a brief but predictable 15-minute gap in his surveillance. That night, Alessia did not sleep. She dressed in black silk pajamas that would allow for silent movement. She waited, listening to the silence of the house, her heart a slow, steady drum against her ribs. She heard the faint sound of Leo's footsteps as he walked away down the hall. The clock started ticking. Slipping out of her room, she was a shadow in the darkened corridor. She moved with a grace and stealth taught to her since childhood, every sense on high alert. The door to Dante's study was at the end of the hall, an ornate, imposing barrier. She had no key, but Volkovs were taught more than just etiquette. From a tiny pocket in her pajamas, she withdrew 2 thin, strong pieces of metal. Lockpicks. Kneeling before the door, she took a steadying breath. This was it. The first real move in her war. She wasn't defending anymore. She was attacking. She inserted the tension wrench and the pick into the lock, her touch featherlight, listening for the faint click of the tumblers. That would be the sound of her enemy's secrets falling open. The first tumbler clicked. Then the second. Alessia held her breath, her senses screaming. Time was running out. She worked the tension wrench with excruciating delicacy. Finally, with a soft snick that sounded as loud as a gunshot in the silent house, the lock gave way. She didn't hesitate. She pushed the door open just enough to slip through and closed it silently behind her. The air inside was cool and still, thick with the scent of old leather, expensive whiskey, and Dante's unique cologne. It was the scent of power itself. The room was dark, lit only by the faint moonlight filtering through the tall mullioned window. Her eyes adjusted quickly, taking in the space. It was exactly as Sophia had described. A throne room, a massive, mahogany desk stood like an altar before the window. The walls were lined with books from floor to ceiling, not just decorative volumes, but works on history, military strategy, philosophy. This was the mind of her enemy laid bare. She moved with purpose, her bare feet making no sound on the antique Persian rug. 15 minutes. That's all she had. She went to the desk first. The drawers were locked, but there were simple locks, easy to bypass. She rifled through them, finding business contracts, property deeds, and correspondence, but nothing incriminating, nothing that would burn his empire to the ground. Her eyes scanned the room, searching. Behind a large, abstract oil painting to the right of the desk, she saw the faint outline. A wall safe. Of course, her heart hammered against her ribs. This was it. It was a modern, digital safe, far beyond her simple lock-picking skills. She studied the keypad. It needed a code. What would he use? A birthday? Too simple. She thought of the information from Sophia. The date his mother died. It was a long shot, a guess based on a sliver of emotion. She keyed in the numbers she knew from family records. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, with a soft electronic whir, the heavy steel door clicked open. A wave of triumphant adrenaline surged through her. Inside, there were stacks of cash, a handgun, and several passports with his picture in different names. And tucked in the back, just as she'd hoped, was a small, unassuming ledger bound in black leather. She grabbed it, her hands trembling slightly. She carried it to the desk, using the faint moonlight to scan the pages. It was all there, a meticulously detailed account of his entire operation. Names of shell corporations, offshore account numbers, contacts within the police and city government, shipment dates. It was a weapon of mass destruction. It was everything she needed. She was about to close it when her fingers brushed against something tucked into a sleeve in the back cover. She pulled it out. It was a faded photograph of a smiling young woman with warm, dark eyes and hair that fell in soft waves around her shoulders. She was beautiful, and she was a complete stranger. Behind the photo was a newspaper clipping, yellowed with age. The headline read, "Tragic accident claims life of university student." Her eyes devoured the text. The student, Isabella Rossi, was killed when her car was riddled with bullets in a brazen drive-by shooting. The police suspected it was a failed mob hit, with a real target likely being her companion, who escaped unharmed. The companion was unnamed in the article. The date of the article was from 8 years ago. Alessia stared at the smiling face of the dead girl, a cold dread seeping into her bones. This felt different from the cold accounting of the ledger. This was personal. This was a secret grief. A floorboard creaked in the hallway. Alessia froze, her blood turning to ice. She heard the soft, unmistakable sound of the doorknob turning. She had miscalculated. Her time was up. The door swung open, and a dark silhouette filled the frame. Dante. He stood there, perfectly still, his suit jacket gone, his tie loosened. He was not supposed to be here. He was supposed to be across town. Behind him in the hall, she could see the terrified, pale face of Leo, the young guard. Caught, Dante's eyes adjusted to the darkness, and they found her. He wasn't shocked. He wasn't even angry. He was something far worse. He was unnervingly, murderously calm. He took a step into the room, closing the door behind him, plunging them into near-total darkness again. "I had a feeling," he said, his voice a low, deadly rumble, "that my new wife might get lonely." He walked toward her, his movements as fluid and silent as a panther's. She was trapped, the massive desk behind her, the predator before her. The ledger felt heavy and useless in her hands, looking for the keys to the kingdom Mowgli Mia. He whispered as he came to a stop just before the desk. "Did you find what you were looking for?" Her survival instincts screamed at her, but she held her ground. She held up the ledger. "Everything I needed to ruin you." Then, her hands shaking almost imperceptibly, she held up the photograph. "But I also found this." "Who was she?" Dante. His gaze fell from the ledger to the small, faded photo in her hand. For the first time since she had met him, his mask of iron control shattered. The rage, the power, the arrogance, it all dissolved, replaced by a raw, profound wave of pain that was so naked it stole her breath. He looked broken. "Her name," he said, his voice rough, hoarse with a grief that was 8 years old but still fresh, "was Isabella." He sank into the leather chair opposite the desk, his eyes never leaving the photograph. She was a student, a painter. She had nothing to do with this life. She was she was everything before I became this. Alessia stood frozen, clutching the evidence of his crimes and his heartbreak. "What happened?" she whispered, the question escaping against her will. "A drive-by," he said, his voice flat. "An ambush meant for me. She died in my arms." He finally lifted his gaze to meet hers, and his eyes were filled with a hatred so deep and pure it dwarfed anything she'd ever felt. A Volkov hit. "Your father's men trying to take me out." The world tilted, spinning violently out of control. "No," she breathed. "That's not possible. You think the war started with your brother?" he asked, a bitter, broken laugh escaping his lips. "The war is endless. It always has been. Your family took her from me, so I vowed to take everything from them." "Mikhail," she choked out. "The car bomb." He shook his head, a weary, defeated gesture. "The bomb that killed Mikhail was not our work." At her look of disbelief, he continued, his voice tired. "There was another family at the time. They were trying to start an all-out war between us, hoping we would wipe each other out so they could take the city. Our intelligence confirmed it years ago. They planted that bomb, but by then, it was too late. The hatred was too deep. No one would have believed the truth. So I let you hate me for it. I let the world think I was the monster who killed your brother. Your hatred made you predictable, and my own grief. It needed a target." The ledger slipped from Alessia's fingers, landing on the desk with a soft thud. It meant nothing. Her entire life, the single, burning conviction that had fueled her brother's murder at the hands of Dante Moretti, was a lie. A lie built on a lie. Her family wasn't the victim of his monstrous act. They were the perpetrators of his. They had created the monster that stood before her. She looked at him, truly looked at him, and saw not an enemy, but a mirror of her own tragedy. A man hollowed out by a loss so profound it had reshaped his soul. The roles of villain and victim, murderer and mourner, had become so horrifically intertwined that they were meaningless. "This marriage," Dante said, his voice barely a whisper now, raw with confession. "The peace talks were real, but for me, it was something else. It was my penance, to bind myself to the name that destroyed my world. And it was a cage for you, to stop the cycle of violence, to stop you from chasing a ghost for a crime I didn't commit." He stood up and walked around the desk, stopping in front of her. The rage was gone. The threat was gone. All that was left was the vast, empty space of their shared, misguided tragedy. He gently took the photograph of Isabella from her numb fingers. "What are we now?" Alessia whispered, the question hanging in the devastating silence of the room. "I don't know," he answered, his voice thick with an emotion she couldn't name. They stood there, inches apart, in the heart of his dark empire. No longer just enemies, not allies, not husband and wife. They were two survivors of a war they had misunderstood, bound together by lies and a grief that was tragically, intimately, the same. The hatred that had defined them was gone, burned away by a truth more terrible than any lie. And in its place was a vast, terrifying, and uncertain emptiness. The war was over, and a new world, one without maps or rules, had just begun.